Okay, so the fans out there, I'm going to tell you that we'll take your questions, but please make sure that you stay to the end, because before we take your questions, we do have already questions that we laid out, but definitely we'll take your questions. Okay, so let's have a brief conversation, including Block and Flutter and related stuff with Felix,
Mhm.
and then we'll take your live questions and we'll see how long Felix can give us, because I see our fans are bumped up, very excited, pumped up actually, and very excited. All right. So here, Felix, the first question. So, what motivated you to develop state management packages in Flutter?
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the reason for it was mainly because, like I mentioned at the time, when I was working with Flutter at the beginning, in 2018, 2019, it was in the context of like working on a larger team, on a larger app, and I believe at the time there weren't many options. Like state management wasn't a big deal in Flutter back then. I believe that you had like scoped model. And then you had this like block pattern that Google had described, or developers at Google had described at some conferences and online. And people were implementing that block pattern using just stream controllers or RX Dart. But there really wasn't any state management packages as you know them now. Like I
Yeah.
don't think there was like a MobX or Signals or riverpod or any of that stuff. And so basically we were in this phase. Oh, actually there was Redux as well. Redux was another big one that existed when I first started, and so we were kind of in this phase of experimenting to find what kind of approach would work well for our team. And so we tried a bunch of different things. Like we tried first we tried just vanilla set state. Obviously,
All
like
right.
we started building lots of the app just using the built-in APIs in Flutter, and like you can definitely do that. But I think for us, we were just concerned about how well it would scale in terms of a larger team and having safety rails for people, and making sure that the app was kind of observable. Like you could see what was happening at any point in time and you can debug it easily. And so we started looking at things like scoped model. We looked at Redux. And we started also reading about the block pattern, as I mentioned, that was described by some of the engineers at Google. And we kind of like took the things that we liked from all of those, or at least I was taking the things that I liked from all of those when I was coming up with the idea for this block package. And really, I created a talk. I can maybe share the link with you,
Sure.
and you can share it with the viewers later. That I go way more in depth on this, but the long story short is, we I tried to take the things that we really liked from the block pattern, like the principles of the block pattern, separate your business logic from your UI, have it be reactive, be able to write your logic in pure Dart and share it everywhere. And I tried to kind of keep the essence of that while reducing the likelihood of you kind of shooting yourself in the foot, be it with RX Dart. We had lots of experiences with RX in the past, and RX, even though it's really powerful, it's really easy to do things that end up backfiring. Let's say, like if you're not really familiar with RX, like it's really easy to create kind of spaghetti where it's really hard to debug your app, and there's lots of subjects and observables everywhere. And so we wanted to kind of have the reactivity and have the separation of business logic and UI without having the kind of pain that came with managing RX and or the verbosity that came with like creating stream controllers everywhere, and maybe you forget to dispose something, or maybe you don't cancel a stream subscription. And so that's kind of the package came from, was just trying to solve all these problems in a package that's reusable, that would benefit the team at the beginning. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there was not many people in the community. There weren't many people in the community building apps with Flutter. I think the community is way, way larger now than it was when I first started. And so the package was mainly meant to help our team at the time. And the reason it was open source was just because I thought, why not? Like, if anyone else benefits from this, great, it's a bonus. And if not, that's okay as well. And yeah, luckily, a lot of people were interested, and it started benefiting people all over the place. And the package grew and evolved, and all that good stuff. But really, it started with just trying to solve this problem of how can we manage the state of a pretty large app with a pretty large team, without kind of having a lot of the pain that comes with using reactive programming. And so that's how we got here.
All right.
And I think the package is pretty stable now. Just one other thing I wanted to say is that was obviously a long time ago. The package is still being maintained, and it's just not changing as much as it used to because it's, I think, stabilized, and there's a lot of people using it. And I think that we've kind of reached this good point of there's a lot of state management packages in the Flutter community, and BLoC's just one of those. But it's still like I see new apps using it every single day, and I see our Discord for BLoC is super active. So if anyone's out there that wants to use BLoC or is using BLoC and wants to find other folks that are using it or ask questions, I highly recommend joining the Discord, and we can maybe share the link to the Discord later.
Okay.
But that's how we got here.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. It's nice to know everything from you, and the way that you and your team, the initial spirit that this was a problem, and then you solved it, and then shared with the community. That's a great thing. And not only that, I think on the top of that, the way you guys made a wrapper around RxDart or stream controller, because when I first came into RxDart or stream controller, it was, I would say, scary, because when Flutter was new to me, I was like, what is this? So there are a lot of concept, and even the name itself, RxDart, I think it could be scary. So but when I started to use Flutter BLoC 8, I think from there, even you guys made it much more easier. Like, you guys used to use this what is it, property map to function event or something like that. So I think that was still a bit of scary, but then I think from Flutter 8.0, you guys took it away, and it made it super easy. I mean, so to me, the way I understand, the simplest form of, the simplest way to understand BLoC is that, okay, I have states and I have events. So I use the events to carry data to my shared memory. So once my data is in the shared memory, then I use states or emit function to emit my data, or let the UI know that, okay, I have something here new, so go ahead and rebuild the part where you need to rebuild. So that's as simple as that one.
Yep.
All right. Okay. I mean, that's my understanding, and that's how I try to make sense to the people. They tell me that they don't understand BLoC. Then I say, no. I mean, there isn't much thing that you need to know. I mean, BLoC made the state management so easy. I mean, I think all we need to know what is state and what is an event and how do they work. And mostly, I think beginners, they get stuck to comprehend actually what is event, why we call it event, or what does it do actually. I think this is where they get stuck. And I tell them that, okay, it's nothing but, I would say that the simplest form, data transaction. Move your data from one screen to another screen. But how do you do that? You put your data to shared memory, and you do it through event. That's all.
I think that the event-based paradigm is difficult for some people who aren't familiar with it. I think that's another reason why Qubit exists and came into existence, was to give folks who are maybe more comfortable with just functions and not having kind of this this event-driven architecture. I'm blanking on the words. So there's multiple options. Like if you don't need events, if you don't need to trace how you got to a certain state, you can always use qubits, and that will give you a lot of the same benefits as using blocks without some of the complexity of thinking about events and asynchronously handling lots of different events. But yeah, like you described it, it's pretty much the way I think about it is you have events coming in and then you have states coming out, and your block is kind of just this like brain that knows how to figure out like, okay, based on this event that came in and whatever other information, what should be the next state. And then it doesn't care who's listening. No one might be listening, or a million things might be listening. And it doesn't really care. It's more just handling the logic of transforming the incoming events into outgoing states. And then anyone could be listening and either re-rendering UI or doing completely other tasks. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, you described it pretty well. And I think we have I think one of the things developers mentioned to me a lot is the docs are pretty helpful in onboarding folks. So if anyone's out there watching and wants to get started and you're wondering what the best place to go to is, I highly recommend just checking out the docs, which is just blocklibrary.dev. Because there it starts off just explaining the concepts like we just talked about, like what is the overall kind of conceptually, like what are you doing, what are events, what are states, what are streams, and then we get into some like simple examples, and then we get into even more complicated examples. And so I think it's a good progression for anyone who's interested in getting started. But yeah, I think you nailed it. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. I mean, I don't know that the way it may look or sound when someone comes new to Flutter. It may be scary, but even it was a scary thing for me few weeks. I would say that when I started BLoC, I said, "What is this?" But
Mhm.
as soon as I get the hang of it, I was like, "Oh, this is a breeze." I mean, it's just so simple. It took away. I mean, just event and state. That's all. I mean, you have to figure out that what is it, or just try to understand what is it and how it works. You don't have to understand tons of other concepts to make it work, right?
Yeah, and we
And,
tried to make it as safe and beginner friendly as possible by not having you have to learn RX, or not having you have to deal with managing subscriptions and stream controllers and all that. You obviously can do that if you want to. Like it's there for advanced users who feel really comfortable using RX, or managing their own streams. But for most cases, you really don't have to touch any of that stuff, and you don't have to worry about forgetting to dispose some or cancel some subscriptions, or dispose some controllers. We try to handle a lot of those cases for you. And I think another nice thing about it is that you can control how those events are processed or states are emitted. Like if you're building like a search, for example, and you don't want to make a query to your backend every single time a user types a key on their keyboard, you can like debounce, or you can throttle, or you can build your own custom logic for how often you're processing events. And if you want to drop some events, you can use the droppable transformer. There's all these transformers that come with this BLoC concurrency package that is on pub.dev as well, but you can also build your own. And yeah, I think that's another unique thing that I haven't seen many other state management packages kind of embrace, making that type of thing easier. And I think that's pretty common in a lot of apps, that you don't want to be, for example, if someone clicks a login button like 100 times, you don't want to be submitting a login request 100 times. You only want to maybe process the first one and ignore the rest. And yeah, it's really tedious to implement that logic yourself as a developer over and over and over again. So try to make that a little bit easier with transformers. And yeah, I think that's another kind of nice advantage that maybe not a lot of people use or know about. I'm not sure. But that was also recently added in BLoC V8, like you mentioned. So
well,
yeah,
so this is
so
one of the
safe.
cool
Yeah.
feature that you just mentioned, that like if I have a login button and I don't want to press it 100 times, so which can eventually, and this is not a good practice, right? And at the end, it can also slow down our server, right? So this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
also
yeah.
included in our BLoC package.
Yeah, it's a core API, and then there's a bunch of customizable. They're called event transformers. So the event transformer API is just part of BLoC, and then there's a separate package called BLoC concurrency, and that includes a bunch of commonly like useful transformers that you might want to use. Like for example, there's one called restartable, which only processes the most recent event. So in the login case, for example, if you tap the login button 100 times, it will ignore the previous 99, and it will only process the last one, or the most recent one. And then there's the inverse of that, which is the droppable one, which will only process the first one, and it'll ignore the remaining ones until the first one's done. And there's a bunch of those that are really helpful in real world scenarios where you're actually building apps that need to be kind of network conscious and also provide a good user experience. And yeah, I think that's kind of a nice to know thing. If you're ever building that kind of functionality manually, check out the BLoC concurrency package and the event transformer API, because you might be able to get that functionality with like one line of code. And so that's kind of nice to know.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. So
Mhm.
definitely, even for us, me and my team, we're gonna definitely check that out. The one that you said,
Mhm.
event transformers, because mostly the way that we use, or most people use, the simplest form, as I said, that state and event. That's it's done, and the rest of the thing we handle on our own. But if BLoC or
Yeah.
the related packages are providing these services, definitely we'll check that out, and hopefully we would be the first one again, just like clean architecture using BLoC on YouTube. We're gonna create tutorials for that. And then next question is that I think I'm gonna take one questions from one of our fans. I think they're waiting. So here, one of the questions, Robin Specht, he asked. He says that, do you recommend hydrated block?
hmm Yeah, so I think in general, if you're on pub.dev and you see, like if you go to the block package on pub.dev, you'll see that it's part of a publisher called Block Library. And
Yeah.
that publisher includes all of the like official block packages that I maintain and a bunch of other people help maintain. And I definitely recommend any of those in there. Hydrated Block is one of them. So if you ever want to, Hydrated Block, just for those who don't know, is just a way to basically make your block save and restore its state. So if you hot restart, you won't lose your state, or if you kill your app and relaunch your app, you'll resume from where you left off. So that's really helpful for things like preferences, like maybe the user wants to pick whether they prefer light mode or dark mode in your app, and you want to save that. A lot of people implement that using like shared preferences, or they implement it using their own storage or caching mechanism. And with Hydrated Block, it's as simple as just change extends block to extends hydrated block, and then you just have to provide a to JSON and a from JSON to tell the block how to deserialize and serialize its state, and then you're done. And then all of the state that's managed by that block will be automatically saved and restored whenever that block is disposed and recreated. And that will persist across app relaunches as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend if you see any package that's under that publisher, I recommend. It's well tested, it's well documented, it's used by a decent number of people. So I think it's generally safe to use, and I recommend using them. If you have any questions or issues about any of those packages, just file an issue or post on Discord, and I'll try my best to answer as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you, Felix. Now, hydrated
Mhm.
block, this package I have used before, and I knew that it's for data storage. So, can we say that it's equivalent to shared preference?
It's like one layer. I think you can think of it more like if block integrated with shared preferences automatically. I wouldn't use it as shared preferences. Like I don't think you should use hydrated block to just share or to just save any arbitrary data like a storage.
Yeah.
It's more like if you're already using block to manage some state, and if it would be beneficial for that state to be saved and restored automatically, then hydrated block is a good way to do that. I think one thing to keep in mind is by default it uses Hive, which is another pure Dart storage solution. It's just a key value storage that's really, really fast. But it has some limitations. So, for example, with Hive, it is really, really fast because it loads everything that you've stored into memory. So you don't want to be storing like gigabytes of data in Hive because you'll run out of memory on the user's devices. So it's really good for like small pieces of data, which usually your state is like a relatively small amount of data, and it's not a huge deal. But you can also, with Hydrated Block, pick a different storage provider. So if you want to hook it up to like SQLite, or if you want to use shared preferences, or if you want to use something else, you can write your own storage adapter and then swap it out and use your own. So it's pretty flexible in that regard. But I would really only think of it when you already are managing some state with a block and you just want that state to automatically be saved and restored. That's where hydrated block is good. If you just need like a database or some sort of storage mechanism, there's better. Like I wouldn't use it as your database or as your storage. I think that would not be the right. That's not the intended use for it.
All right, thank you, Felix. So there is
Mhm.
another
Mhm.
question from our fans. It says some tips for minimizing verbosity when defining block states.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think a lot of people, when they hear block, they think, "Oh, it's so verbose. I have to write so much code." I think there's a lot of there's a lot of approaches for defining your states, and I don't think there's one best way. Um, I think that it really just depends on the feature that you're building and the functionality that you want. But like probably when you think of verbosity, you're thinking of the default, like you have a base state that's like abstract or sealed, and then you have a bunch of subclasses for that state. And like there's some extensions and there's some snippets if you use VS Code or Android Studio that will help make that easier. So if you're using VS Code, there's the BLoC VS Code extension. If you're using IntelliJ or Android Studio, there's the IntelliJ extension. And both of those include like snippets or live templates that help you kind of like write those types of things more quickly. Um, but there are other ways of modeling your state. For example, if you have a state where maybe you have some like data that you're storing on that state, and you also have like some loading progress that you want to be showing, and maybe you want to be showing the loading progress in addition to whatever data you already have. Like maybe you're doing some pagination or like some infinite loading of some data in a scroll view. In those cases, it might be more efficient to like kind of model your state as a single class that has some data potentially, it has some error maybe, or it has some like loading state maybe, and then the downside of that is you have to kind of like handle checking, like, do I have data, am I loading, am I do I have an error, and these are all like maybe nullable properties, or they have like default values on your state. But the benefit of that is you write less code in terms of your states. The original approach that I mentioned, where you have a base class and a bunch of subclasses, that you end up writing a little bit more code, but it's a lot more explicit. Like, you know for sure that if I'm in the like loading state, I don't have any data maybe, or I do have some data. Like, it's very, you can't mess up, because Dart will help you, and it will infer what properties you have available on your state based on the subclass that you're in. And I think with new Dart language features like pattern matching and sealed classes, it's a lot nicer, because you can make sure that every time you add a new state, you handle that state. If you're using a switch statement, for example, you can have that exhaustive switch so that you don't forget to render a widget maybe if you add a new state. So there's a lot of ways, but I think in terms of boilerplate, I think that for me personally, I honestly don't spend that much time thinking about like all this boilerplate that I'm writing, because there really is no boilerplate in my opinion. It's just like, how do you want to model your state? And BLoC doesn't care how you model your state. It could be a Dart class, it could be an integer, it could be an enum, it could be anything. It's really up to you to define that. And so I think that, like I mentioned, the VS Code extension and IntelliJ extension, they really help with like some of these templates. And there's also another tool that I maintain that's called Mason, which is a templating tool. And there's some templates for generating like entire features that use BLoC. So I can maybe share a link with you after, and you can share it with the chat. But for me, when I'm building Flutter apps, I'm really just using the Mason bricks, is what they're called, or templates. Whenever I want to generate a new feature, and that new feature contains the BLoC, contains the states, contains the events, and it contains the UI. And then all I'm doing is I'm just writing the logic or building the UI. I'm not really spending a lot of time wiring things up, because it's kind of the same process over and over and over again. But yeah, I think hopefully that helps. There's no right or wrong way to model your states. I think that it really just depends on what type of functionality you're building and what you want the user experience to be. But I think that having the subclasses is, if you're not sure, I recommend having a base class and multiple subclasses, just because that ends up being the safest. Like you can't accidentally try to access null values in your widget tree, or get into like weird cases where you're not handling a specific state. That approach is very, very explicit, and make sure that you account for every single state, and it's type safe and strongly typed and everything. So hopefully that helps. But I think that a lot of people don't know about the tooling, like the VS Code extensions and IntelliJ plugin. I think a lot of people, those are like hidden gems maybe, like not a lot of people use them, and for me it's like that's what I use all the time. So I definitely recommend checking out especially VS Code. I think VS Code is a little more advanced than the IntelliJ tooling, so if you're a VS Code user, you'll benefit from a little bit more functionality, but overall they're pretty similar in terms of functionality. So yeah, hope that helps.
All right, thank you, Felix. Now, I totally agree the way you described that, the verbosity. They say that I don't think there is a boilerplate code when we do BLoC or write Flutter apps using BLoC. The thing is that I think internet could be a messy place sometimes. People talk
Oh yeah.
anything there. I mean, they could go ahead and anything. And I know there are people say maybe they're the author of certain state management, and they go ahead and say about other people's state management that this is bad, this is that. But I think because I have used GetX, I have used riverpod, I have used BLoC, I mean all of them, and I actually use all of them most of the time. But if someone asks me that what's your preferred one, definitely that's BLoC. But now because I would say me myself being an educator, but I've been teaching for the last 20 years, but in
Hmm.
terms of online teaching, this is relatively new to me. So I
Hmm.
wouldn't go ahead and attack people. But if do people ask me that, okay, so is there boilerplate code? No, I don't say no. There isn't any boilerplate code. Why? Because I think personally, when you do BLoC, actually you are learning not only Flutter, you're learning Dart, because this very simple basic stuff that BLoC helps us to learn and implement, like base class, subclass, abstract class, things like that. I think this is one of the core. I think it's a beautiful thing the way that BLoC lets us to practice Dart or related concept in programming, because
Hmm.
having a base class and subclass is a basic programming concept. And I did
Yep.
see that, or I do see even now, that a lot of other state management packages, they try to take away this thing, or when you use them, I would say that no, it works somehow because this is their architecture, but I don't think it's a pure Dart programming, or we are practicing Dart. So that's how I look at it. So definitely in terms of boilerplate code, no, because the way you just described that. So each of the, I mean, each state is responsible. Each state class or a subclass is responsible for emitting a state or handling or processing some data that would update the UI. I think that's the safest one, and this way we get to practice Flutter, Dart, and the core programming concept. And this is where actually I started to love more BLoC, when I realized that, oh, actually sometimes I feel I'm not even writing BLoC, I'm writing actually Dart, and I think that's the
Yeah,
beauty
yeah,
of
that
it.
was the goal. That was the goal, is to keep it just as close to Dart as possible so that you can kind of lift that logic out of your app and share it somewhere else. Maybe you're building a CLI, maybe you want that logic on the server. You can still reuse that logic since it's all pure Dart. And
Okay.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear you don't think there's a lot of boilerplate. To me, boilerplate means I'm writing code that's useless just for the sake of writing code. And in my opinion, all
Yeah,
the code
of
that you're
course,
writing, when you
it's not a boilerplate code, because once again, internet is a messy place. Trust me, because
yeah, well, and
just like you, most probably you also know we are all actively engaged in our social media, different kind of social media. So people go
yeah.
and say a lot of stuff that is, I think, other people, beginners, the people they are new into this Flutter community, I don't think they know. But the way, even after using clean architecture, I was like, I'm in love with the BLoC, because I think the way you created BLoC, I think it just fully created for clean architecture approach. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
No, it's
clean
great to
architecture
hear.
itself, once again, because when we use BLoC, I feel like we are using BLoC at the same time we are also doing clean architecture, and that means that we are actually learning a programming concept. I'm not learning something that only specific to Flutter, okay? Because as I do BLoC, I'm learning how class, subclasses, even we say the abstract keyword, how this concept they work, right? So as I
Hmm. Hmm.
do and implement clean architecture, so I know that this same approach I could be using with Java, C Sharp, or any other framework in that matter. So that's why I think I also tell my fans that, okay, you are learning BLoC and clean architecture. It's not just learning these two concepts. Actually, you are learning programming concept. So the question is, when you created BLoC, so clean architecture concept, was it there from the beginning?
I think I've never been like a pure clean architecture person. I've read the books and I'm familiar with clean architecture. I think the architecture that's described in the BLoC documentation is kind of like a simplified clean architecture.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times I've seen developers follow clean architecture and try to follow clean architecture, and they end up creating lots of kind of like abstractions that maybe aren't necessary at that
Yeah.
time, or maybe they're building an app that doesn't require them, and then they end up not liking it because they feel like they're writing so much code for no reason. And so I think the architecture that's described on the block docs is kind of like a minimalistic, like clean architecture. It's not really clean architecture as described by the book, but it's kind of encouraging you to split out like your data acquisition from your domain logic, from your presentation and your feature logic. And the nice thing about that architecture, in my opinion, is you can scale it all the way to full-blown clean architecture if you want it, or if you need it, or if you don't, and you it's enough to have just those 3 layers. Then you can keep those 3 layers. But really, yeah, I think that I've seen a lot of people use BLoC and clean architecture, and uh, they seem to really like it, and they seem to have no complaints really. But I think it really just depends on what app you're building and what background you come from. And I mean, there's plenty of architectures out there. They all have their pros and cons. And I think the main thing that BLoC is aiming to achieve is that separation of logic from presentation, and I think that that kind of is compatible with most architecture. So hopefully, like if you're familiar with MVC, you can use BLoC as kind of like your controller. MVVM is somewhat similar. You can go full blown clean architecture and create your use cases, and separate everything out even more. If you need to, especially for larger apps, maybe that's beneficial. But I think that it's important to make sure that you pick the architecture that makes sense for you and your team and the app that you're building, and then be able to adapt later. I always think that a good sign of like a healthy code base with a good architecture is being able to adapt if you need to, like being able to recognize that, hey, we made some assumptions that are no longer valid, and like we need to adjust something because it's no longer working for us, and being able to quickly adjust and make those changes without rewriting the entire code base, I think is a good sign of a good, healthy architecture. Just because, in my opinion, the whole point of architecture is to give you flexibility so that you can deliver as much value as possible without spending a lot of time, and have something that's manageable and easy to maintain by your team. So I think that, yeah, make sure that you just pick the right thing for you and your team. And yeah, but yeah, clean architecture, I think there's plenty of, I've seen like lots of YouTube tutorials and documentation. It sounds like you're covering clean architecture in your videos a lot. So if there's
Yes,
anything
yes, we are
that's
doing that.
missing that you want to go in depth on, let me know. But I don't think BLoC doesn't really have a strong opinion on like what
Yeah, but
architecture you're
I
using it in.
personally think the people we use clean architecture, we love BLoC in that sense, because me and my other colleagues, we use it, and in the community I have seen people when it comes to
Mhm,
BLoC. So the clean architecture feels like the first thing, and
mhm,
as we used actually other state management packages, we have
mhm,
this kind of thing, feeling like it's kind of anti-pattern. But anyway, but once
mhm,
again, as you mentioned, that one can go ahead with MVC architecture and that still work. Okay, so there
mhm,
is a question from Fan. His
mhm.
name's, let me see, Adil somebody. I can't read it last name. It's too difficult. But anyway, so he's asking that, okay, some book.
You cut
Yeah,
out for
yeah,
a
I can
second.
hear you. I
Yeah.
can hear you. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, you're back. You're back. Yeah. So
right.
book recommendations.
Yeah.
I mean, currently I have on my shelf somewhere Uncle or Bob Nystrom's Crafting Interpreters. So if you're interested in interpreters, and if you're interested in reading a book by one of the members.
Hi, Felix. I think we had a problem with the network. You're back.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what you heard, but I was.
Yeah, an interpreter. You're talking about a book.
Yeah. One of the books that I'm currently trying to get through is Crafting Interpreters by Bob Nystrom, who's on the Dart team. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of books out there. There's for Flutter specifically, I helped edit a little bit the complete Flutter reference, I believe, is the name of the book. So if you want to check it out, I know lots of other members of the community are writing their own books now on Flutter specifically. So there's tons and tons of material out there. Like you said, I just don't have enough time to even keep up with all the content and material out there. So, but there's lots of good stuff, and yeah, I really recommend Crafting Interpreters if anyone's interested. It's really well done, and I'm enjoying it so far. So.
All right, thank you, Felix. Next
Mhm,
question is that
mhm.
how do the BLoC listeners work behind the scenes?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that I really like about the BLoC library implementation is that at the end of the day, if you go and actually look at the source code, there's not that much source code, especially BLoC. Like you can probably fit the whole BLoC implementation in like a couple hundred lines of code. there's more documentation and comments than actual code. So if you look at the block listener source code, you'll see that it's literally just using a stream and a stream subscription. And so behind the scene, everything is just streams. And if you've ever used a stream controller in your app or done like stream.listen, that's basically the exact same mechanism that block listener is doing, except for it's handling all of the subscriptions and canceling and disposing things as needed for you. So it's kind of just like a nice wrapper on top of stream controller or stream builder that you don't have to deal with like async snapshots, and you don't have to pass in streams manually. It just uses the stream that the block has. Since the block is basically just holding a stream, you can almost think of a block as a stream controller, if you want to think of it that way, if you're familiar with stream controllers. So yeah, definitely check out the source code.
Okay, thank you, Felix. So there is another question. Someone's called, his name is Imad. So he's asking, I wonder if there is a way to use BlockConsumer in the same way as the provider consumer to only rebuild the wrapped widget, not the entire screen when the state changes.
Yeah, I mean that is how BlockConsumer. So BlockConsumer is a widget that basically smashes together block listener and block builder. So if you want to perform some like side effect, you would use a block listener, and if you want to rebuild UI, you would use a block builder, and if you need both, you could use a BlockConsumer. And that is how it works, especially if you've used block builder before. You know that whatever widget you're wrapping in your block builder, that's the only widget that will rebuild whenever the state changes. And so you can scope your rebuilds just to the part of the widget tree that you want. If you wrap your whole app in the block builder, then your whole app will rebuild. But if you only wrap like a really small part of your subtree that needs the update, then only that small part of your subtree will update. So I always recommend move your block builder as low as possible in your widget tree so that you can reduce the scope of what gets rebuilt. You don't need to unnecessarily rebuild all the parent widgets. Even though Flutter is really fast, there's no point in doing that if you don't need to. So yeah.
All right. So if we do say we have 10 widgets on the screen, so but one widget needs to be rebuilt, so only that widget we could wrap that around either block builder or BlockConsumer, right?
Yeah, BlockConsumer only if you also need the listener. But yeah, if you just need to rebuild that one widget, you could just wrap it in a block builder. And again, if you use the IntelliJ or VS Code extensions, you can just right click and do wrap with block builder or command dot wrap with block builder, and you have that automatically wrapped for you. So
okay, thank you, Felix. So Felix, I do have a question. I mean, how long do we have? I know we were pretty busy.
I probably have like 10. I can stay 10-ish more minutes.
All right. So
hopefully
now
we can get through all the questions.
I think this is the last question about Block, and then we'll have a bit of question about Shorebird. So yeah. So this question is Interblock Communication best practices.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's a section on the docs about that, again, at blocklibrary.dev. But basically, my recommendation, if you're not sure, is to avoid interblock communication, because that usually ends up causing or introducing more complexity for you. Both you have to mentally think about like, okay, this block depends on this other block, and now I have kind of like data flowing in this potentially cyclic way, which may not be ideal. Also, testing becomes more complicated when you have blocks that depend on other blocks, because now you have to start mocking streams, and your tests become more complicated than just like event goes in, state goes out. So there's a couple of ways that are mentioned in the docs for how to handle this if you need to have some sort of dependency between blocks. One way is you can use a block listener in your widget tree as kind of like the glue between the blocks. So the blocks don't actually know about each other, but you have a listener that it listens to when block A emits some state, and then it adds an event to block B, and that keeps them decoupled. Another approach that works well is usually when you have this like block to block kind of communication or interdependency, it's because you have some core state that's needed by multiple blocks. And usually that's kind of a sign that maybe that's not state that you should maintain in a block. Maybe that's state that you should push down one layer in your app. And so one pattern that you can use for that is you can have one of your repositories. If you follow the architecture on the block docs, you can have your repository actually manage whatever that core shared state is and expose it as a stream. And then now you can have as many blocks as you want, all depend on that repository and subscribe to that that's whatever it is, stream of data, or if it's not a stream, that's okay too. But that way it kind of keeps all of your blocks, because the reason for keeping them decoupled and not having them dependent on each other is because usually we recommend having your blocks manage the state of your features. And you usually don't want to have feature A depend on feature B. And so you don't want to have block A depend on block B for the same reason, because you want those features to be kind of like independent. You can pull them out, you can add them in without affecting the rest of your app. And so, like I mentioned, I think the block library.dev docs cover those two approaches that I just mentioned in more detail, so you can definitely check them out. And if you have more questions, again, on Discord, feel free to ask, and either me or someone else will be happy to help. But yeah, again, not to say that you can't do interblock communication, whatever you called it. Like, you can do that, and it's totally doable. And if you know what you're doing, that's totally fine. But I think for people who are not sure, or if you're a beginner, or if you're kind of like coming to Block for the first time, I think oftentimes it ends up being simpler to avoid that. And unless you know what you're doing, I think that there's ways to kind of like achieve the same thing with a simpler architecture. So, but it's not a don't do it ever. There are some cases where maybe it makes sense to do it. Yeah, so right. It's just a recommendation.
So recently, actually, we are working on a project as well as a YouTube tutorial. So that's with this, it's e-commerce clean architecture using BLoC. Mm-hmm. We also have the riverpod version though. But anyway, so yes, I'm personally working on that, and I started to use BLoC listeners a lot more and multi-block listeners, and somehow I just love that, because I get to listen to other blocks when they emit states and or data. So, and then based on that, I get to know or get to decide that what is my next move. So finding out this thing, I wouldn't say that I went through the docs a lot, but I was just doing, block listener or multi-block listeners, and I was listening to different blocks. I was, oh, this is amazing. Actually, you get to listen. And maybe even when you leave a screen, the earlier screen, if that had block listeners, if that emitted state or did something, you can get to know it in the next page. So I think I'm doing that experiment, and I just love it. And definitely, once again, we're going to create tutorials about that one. So to make it simplified, I think most people, the way they use BLoC, most learners, that it goes back to the earlier question, like, they wrap the whole widget tree using BLoC provider or BlockConsumer, and they feel like, oh, the whole screen is going to rebuild right now. So that's one misconception, or people don't know, and how powerful BLoC listener or multi-block listeners could be. I don't think there aren't many tutorials or people know about it. So definitely we'll work together on this. Yeah. Right. So because we don't have a lot more time, so Felix, next question. So what are you currently doing? What kind of projects you're working on?
Yeah, I'm currently working at Shorebird, and so the product that we're working on right now is just code push for Flutter. So basically, you can think of it as like over-the-air updates for your Flutter app. So if you're building your Flutter app and you've shipped it to the app stores, and you have like whatever millions of users using it, and then you find that there's a critical bug that you need to fix. The product that we're working on right now allows you to make that fix and deploy that fix to all of your users immediately without having to create a new release of your app and submit it to app stores for review and then wait for your users to download that update. Instead, they'll get the update immediately over the air. But otherwise, in my spare time, I'm still maintaining or trying to keep up with maintaining all of the open source tools that I have. So I'm currently working on a BLoC DevTools extension, actually. I'm hoping to finish that somewhat soon. It's taking me a little longer than I expected, but it'll be part of the official DevTools. When you open the Flutter DevTools up, there'll be a tab for BLoC, and then you'll be able to view all the blocks that are in your app and what their states are, and see their state changes and see their history of states. So it should hopefully be useful. But yeah, I think like I mentioned, I'm pretty busy. There's not a lot of time, so those are kind of the main things that I'm working on. It's just maintaining the open source tooling, and then code push at Shorebird. So, but if anyone has questions about any of those things, I'm happy to go more in depth.
All right. So now, what inspired you to do Shorebird?
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting because when I first wanted to join Shorebird, or when I first reached out to Eric to express interest in Shorebird, the direction of Shorebird was a little different. I think the idea behind Shorebird, which still is the same today, is kind of that Flutter and Google have their own roadmap and their own incentives, and those incentives don't necessarily align with what enterprise companies need who are using Flutter, which
Right.
results in some gaps in the Flutter ecosystem. And for example, code push is the number one most upvoted issue on the Flutter organization, and it's like the 30th or something really high of all issues on GitHub that are upvoted. So clearly, a lot of people wanted code push in Flutter, but because of various reasons and incentives within Google, that was never going to be built by Google. And so Shorebird aims to kind of solve some of these problems and fill some of these gaps that exist in the Flutter ecosystem that will specifically help empower businesses who are using Flutter. And our goal is to make multi-platform the default. Like Eric Seidel, who worked at Google for a long time, he worked at Apple before that. His goal this whole time has been, let's only write apps once. Let's not write the same app like 4 different times or 3 different times. And so Shorebird is kind of a continuation of that to provide you the tooling so that multi-platform using Flutter can be your go-to. Um, and so for me, that mission really resonated, and I was really interested in joining because of that, and also just to be able to work with Eric and other awesome engineers. And I also kind of needed a change at the time. I had been working at VGV, and as much as I liked working at VGV, I realized consulting was not for me, and I would much rather be working on a product or a series of products. Just that's kind of something that I learned about myself after a period of time. So that's all those reasons kind of led me to express interest in joining Shorebird, and I've been really happy and excited on what we're regarding what we're working on. And it's been almost a year since I've joined, so time really flies. But yeah, it's been great so far.
All right, Felix, thank you so much. And
Mm-hmm.
the last question is that, so what do you think the future of Flutter in your mind?
I think that yeah, the future of Flutter is pretty bright. I think that it's still I see a lot of like posts on Reddit about like, oh, should I learn Flutter? Should I use or should I learn some other technology? Like, what's the job market like? All this stuff, and like I would say that even though it seems like a lot more jobs are available maybe for React or React Native, I still think that the common kind of consensus that I'm seeing when I talk to people is that when it comes to building multi-platform experiences for people, if you've tried Flutter, it's really hard to switch and try something else. So I think that the jobs and like the market is kind of it takes time to build up, and I think that like if you already know JavaScript, like it's going to be a lot more enticing to continue using JavaScript and continue using React, and like it makes sense to do that. But I think that Flutter still has like solved this multi-platform problem in such a way that makes the developer experience really, really pleasant. And I don't think about, is my app going to look the same on all these platforms anymore? I'm just confident that it will. And the language, even though you have to learn a new language, I feel like for me, I came from using TypeScript before, immediately before Flutter, and I felt right at home with Dart, and I like the evolution of the language and how they're adding more and more features. So I think that it has a bright future. I think that, as always, you have to kind of pick and choose the right tool for the job. And obviously, like if your company is using a different technology, you're using a different technology at work. But I always encourage people to explore and try new things in their free time, just so that you can keep learning and you can keep staying up to date with what other options are out there, because you never know when they might come in handy. But yeah, I think Flutter has a really bright future. I think that hopefully with Shorebird and other companies investing more into Flutter outside of Google, I think we'll continue to expand the ecosystem of products and kind of try to solve some of those gaps that maybe still exist in the ecosystem. So if anyone out there has like a big reason why they haven't been able to adopt Flutter at their company or on their team, definitely let me know if you can. Like you can message me on Twitter or on Discord or whatever, because those are the types of problems that I think at Shorebird and other companies we're trying to solve so that Flutter can be the go-to for companies that want to ship a multi-platform app. If you want to have like a really great experience on multiple screens, I really think that Flutter will be that technology that does that. It's just a matter of the time that it takes to kind of like trickle into the market, and like people need to learn about it, and companies need to take their time and adopt it, and all this stuff takes a lot of time. But I think as a technology, it's really solid, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think that there's a lot of awesome updates coming in the future. So I'm really excited about the future of Flutter. I think that, yeah, like I said, it has a bright future. So.
All right, thank you, Felix. So am I. Just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm very excited about Flutter future. And actually, before I started Flutter, I used to work with React Native. I did it like in a year, and then I found Flutter. And just like you said, that once you learn Flutter, actually, you don't want to go
Yeah,
back
it's
to
so hard
anything
to
else.
it's so hard to go back. Yeah,
It's a different thing. Okay, the
yeah,
bicycle
yeah,
Mercedes thing. I would say like that. Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, not on the same level. Totally not on the same level. So, I mean, since then, and I do know that. I mean, here I do have React Native fans as well in our channel, but
Mhm.
it's just the feeling. Once you try Flutter, I don't think you want to go back to anything else,
Yeah,
including
and I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think like every technology is different. It has its own pros and cons, and like I think that it's not productive to try to argue that one is better than the other. I think that ultimately, like I mentioned, I just recommend people try new things whenever they can and keep an open mind, and then just when it comes time to decide what technology to use to solve a problem, just try to have a good reason why you're picking whatever it is that you're picking,
yeah.
and as always, like, be able to change your mind later if you have a better reason to use something else. Like maybe you start with React Native and then you realize, oh, actually Flutter might be better because of X, Y, and Z. It's okay. You can change, or maybe vice versa. Maybe you're having a hard time because every developer on your team is an expert in JavaScript. Like then maybe React Native makes sense. Like there's use cases for each, and I think that it's not productive to try to argue which one is better, and instead just educate like you're doing on, if you want to use Flutter, here's how you can, here's some resources, here's some best practices. If you want to use something else, that's also cool. And there's plenty of resources, I'm sure, on React Native. So it's no dig on either one. I just think that for me personally, I came from using TypeScript, JavaScript before Dart, and I really like Dart as a language much more. I think that it's a lot more pleasant to use, and it's a lot safer, and the tooling around it is much more. I don't know. It just feels like I have everything I need. Like I don't need to pull in dependencies for everything. There's testing built into uh, to to Dart. There's like dev tools built in. There's like all kinds of stuff that we take for granted. I think once you've been working with Flutter and Dart for a long time, that you have to spend a decent amount of time setting up yourself if you're bootstrapping your own project from scratch. And so I think that yeah, you have to just use the thing that you're most comfortable with and your team is most comfortable with. But yeah, I don't think Flutter is going anywhere anytime soon. And because it's open source, I think the number of contributions to Flutter is continuing to increase, both at Google but also outside of Google, which I think is a really good thing, because the more people are contributing to Flutter outside, the more kind of the knowledge and expertise is distributed across the community. And yeah, I think overall that's a net positive for Flutter. So
All right. Thank
yeah.
you, Felix. Thank you, Felix,
Hmm.
once again for
Hmm.
your helpful insight. And I think you inspired a lot of people. And I think hopefully we'll continue to work with Flutter. And there'll be people like you who is going to contribute more. And then we're going to learn from you guys and then slowly help Flutter and Flutter community. And thanks for your time. Hopefully I'll see you again. And our fans will
Yeah,
see
yeah.
you again in another show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to finally be able to find some time
Yes,
and hop
right.
on.
Okay, it's
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah.
It's definitely
Thanks.
pleasure. So
Hmm.
hopefully next time again. Take care, Felix.
Yep, take care.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.